Okay, so now we're going to talk about Death of a Salesman in particular, and we're going to have a look at an essay, an extract essay question on Death of a Salesman, again for a 45-minute exam answer. So whereas before we looked at some techniques, this time we're going to have the full essay with 3 body paragraphs, and we'll hopefully use some of the strategies that we talked about in tutorial 1. First of all, I've got a question that I've made up, which is on the Requiem, so it's an extract question, which asks us to explore how Miller makes this a memorable conclusion to the play. This is a pretty open question, really. You can decide for yourself what you want to focus on. Your thesis is going to tell us what you're going to focus on. You might want to focus on one particular character, perhaps Linda, who we can see at the front here, who's obviously very emotional. You might want to focus on what it says about a particular theme. It's up to you. It's a very open question, as I say. Remember, of course, your thesis will tell the examiner what you're going to be arguing in your essay. So as long as your thesis is clear, you're going to do quite well. What you don't have to do is speak about everything, because there's far too much for that and you only have 45 minutes. So that's why it's really important that you make sure the thesis is clear and lets us know what you're going to be dealing with. I've got one just here, which is by no means the best thesis you could do. It's just what I've decided to focus on in my essay, which I'm now going to write. And I'm going to focus on the fact that I think the main characters give us their honest assessment of Willie. We haven't necessarily had this before in the play, and certainly not all together. So I'm going to talk about this, but like I say, you could focus your answer on a theme or on a particular character, and you could get an A star. But what is important is that in the thesis, which is obviously the one-sentence introduction, is that you make it clear what you're going to focus on. Okay, so that's there for you, and I think it's a relatively straightforward thesis. So let's have a look at a body paragraph, remembering of course our PE. What we have here for body paragraph 1, the first character to speak about Willie is Happy, and both he and Charlie appear to be deluded by Willie's massive dreams. So the question was, what's memorable? I've said in my thesis that it's the fact that we get honest assessments by the main characters. Okay, and my point here is that Happy and Charlie appear to still be deluded by Willie's massive dreams. Okay, so their honest assessment, if they're deluded by his dreams, then that means they still believe them, which means that therefore their honest assessment is justifying him, is saying that his tragedy was justified and he was right to pursue the dreams that he did. Let's look at my evidence and explanation. Well, Charlie says it was a very nice funeral, which obviously it's nothing like what Willie dreamed of. Willie wanted a massive funeral with lots of people. So the fact that Charlie says it's a nice funeral is kind of false, and would appear that he's still sort of trying to pretend that everything was fine. Happy, he says that Willie did not die in vain, which obviously suggests to us that Happy feels that he now needs to show that Willie's dream can be achieved, and therefore he is justifying again Willie's pursual of that dream. So we have the first 2 characters who seem to offer us the opinion that what Willy Loman stood for, which was this sort of consumer capitalist ambition to do well in America in the late 40s, early 50s, was correct, and he is going to continue. Moving on, I've got the next 2 paragraphs here. So in tutorial 1 we worked with just the 1. I've given us 2 here just to make it a little bit perhaps easier to look at things like conclusion. So the next character to pass judgment is Linda, who can't understand it. There's not necessarily a point here. This is perhaps more of a topic sentence, just introducing the topic for this paragraph. It makes it clear that we're going to talk about Linda and that she passes judgment, but is our point perhaps here. Her most important words come at the end of the Requiem. So we're looking here at a point that we're going to identify what her most important words. Therefore, we're then going to have to link why these important words are. Let's just get the question back up here, shall we? But to link why her most important words make it a memorable conclusion. So if we can shrink this a little bit so it fits down here nicely. Okay. Yeah. So her most important words come when she's alone and repeats that she can't cry and we're free. So why are these her most important words? Well, her inability to cry suggests she's already suffered all that she can. She gave Willie everything she had, and now that he's dead, it almost seems to relieve her of the burden she's been carrying. So if she's being relieved of a burden, it would seem that Willie is perhaps being castigized here. Perhaps Willie was a burden to people and therefore must have been somehow wrong. The repetition of the words "we're free", however, contrasts this by conveying the irony that freedom has come at a cost to her husband's life. So she's got her freedom, but she's going to have to live alone. She can't enjoy it with anyone. So it's a very sad, sort of tragic end for her. And that irony, again, perhaps makes us feel that Willie was wrong, and feel that in fact he has let Linda down and let his family down. And that's why I've put that her final words are therefore a condemnation of Willie's actions and serve to emphasise that his dreams were indeed wrong. This final sentence, you'll notice there's kind of a procedure here. There's the point. I've then explained the point, why these are important, and then I've just made sure in this final sentence that I've linked that back to my question, what makes it memorable. My thesis was that we get honest assessments, and I've said here that this is her honest assessment, that Willie was wrong. So Linda ultimately in the Requiem, according to my reading of the play, you might disagree, suggests that she realises Willie was wrong and therefore condemns him. Okay, and that's obviously in contrast to what Happy and Charlie suggest. Moving on, we have finally, and perhaps most importantly, we hear from Biff, the one character who has constantly tried to speak the truth in the play. So, what's the point here? Well, it's Biff speaking the truth. Okay, so it relates clearly to our thesis very easily, that we get an honest assessment. Biff tells us he had the wrong dreams. Biff's rejection of the consumer-led American dream that Willie believed in gives heart to the audience, as at least one character seems to have learnt something from the tragedy. Indeed, Biff's final actions, where he lifts Linda to her feet before leading her off stage, allow the play to end with a sense of hope for the future. So, again, relatively simple point. The evidence of what Biff says, which we're then going to explain. He says definitively that Willie was wrong. And Willie, of course, his dreams were this kind of consumer-led American dream whereby you are what you buy, you are what you consume, your identity and status and success is defined by your ability not only to purchase products but to show them and off to other people. Biff rejects that, so our third honest assessment comes from Biff, which is similar to Linda's. It's a rejection of Willie's dreams and a realisation that Willie was wrong. So 3 quite simple paragraphs, all related to a fairly simple thesis, and we'll have a look at our conclusion. Remember, we said in the conclusion you restate the thesis and then look to end with maybe a final declaration or statement that really sells your essay to the examiner. In conclusion, the Requiem is strikingly memorable for the differences in opinions that still rages over whether Willie's beliefs were justified and correct. So in my thesis, I said we get honest assessment, and in the conclusion I've developed that idea a bit because we've seen that they're not actually all the same, the honest ones. So I've said it's a difference in opinion that still rages over them. I've then just made it clear that there is this contrast. Happy and Charlie seem to think Willie was correct, whereas Linda and Biff seem to think that he was incorrect and perhaps negligible. And then my final statement, remember we talked about how your conclusion, you could end it with either a statement of greater significance or of modern significance. I've gone here for greater significance this time. Biff seems to offer us an example of what we should learn. Okay, so what ultimately is the playwright trying to teach us through this play? and that links into the idea of it being a memorable conclusion, because it leaves us with this final thing. And what is that? I've put that perhaps it's fine to dream, but we should remember who we are and accept our failures when they inevitably come. It's quite a simplistic essay, starting with a simple introduction. You could write this in 45 minutes. It took me just over 30, and you would be easily in line for an A star. In terms of timing, if you thought you weren't going to have enough time to do this, you could potentially in your thesis say it's a memorable conclusion to the play, as both Biff and Linda give their honest assessments, because they're probably a bit more important than either Happy or Charlie, and you could have just these 2 paragraphs. You'd probably have to write a little bit more, certainly in the Biff one, but that's one way that you could get around if you think that this is too much for a 45-minute essay for you personally. So again, that highlights the fact that your thesis is important, because in it you define what your answer is going to be in this kind of open question where it's why is it memorable. You can pick a particular aspect and talk about that. So if talking about all 4 characters is going to take you too much time, then your thesis say it's important, it's memorable because of what Biff and Linda maybe have to say. Okay, hopefully that has helped clear up some of the questions you might have had about essay writing, and hopefully it will help you do very well and be as successful as possible in your exam on Monday.